Night protests across America after a grand jury finds that 2 police officers were justified in Breonna Taylor's death. Another officer was charged with recklessly firing into a neighbor's apartment, but no one was charged with killing Breonna Taylor. Joining us now, CNN law enforcement analyst Charles Ramsey. He's the former Philadelphia Police Commissioner and former D.C. Police Chief. Also with us is retired LAPD Sergeant Cheryl Dorsey. She's the author of Black and Blue, the Creation of a Social Advocate. Great to see both of you. Sergeant Dorsey, I want to start with you. What is your takeaway from the conclusions reached yesterday by the grand jury and Attorney General there?
Well, it seems to me as if this Attorney General cherry-picked information that he wanted to present to the jurors. We know that there were several residents who said they didn't hear the officers announce, but he chose to present the one who said they did. And when you understand that this AG is a Trump ally and reportedly engaged to the granddaughter of Moscow Mitch, it all makes sense. I find it offensive and appalling.
On the facts that were presented, Chief Ramsey, and again, this is what we've been told by the Attorney General of Kentucky. We haven't necessarily seen the documentation ourselves here. The Attorney General said that Kenneth Walker shot first and hit the officer Jonathan Mattingly, in the leg, and therefore the officers were justified in returning fire. How much does that explain to you? How sufficient is that for an explanation?
Well, first of all, let me start by saying this is a tough one. This isn't as clear-cut as some of the other cases that we have discussed. Listening to the Attorney General and based strictly on what he presented in his press conference yesterday, I understand why the 2 officers were not charged. If things happen the way it is being purported, the officers were fired upon. They were justified in returning fire. Now, that doesn't lessen the tragedy of Breonna Taylor's death at all. And certainly the 3rd officer who blindly fired into the apartment should have been charged criminally. But the fact that one officer who was not only fired upon, was actually struck by gunfire, returned fire, I just don't see where a criminal charge would be presented there. As tragic as this whole thing is, I think one issue, though, that didn't get attention from the Attorney General is why they were there in the first place, the warrant itself. Now, the officers that executed the warrant were not the ones that applied for the warrant. But what was it that made anyone believe that either proceeds or instruments of a crime were present in her apartment? I mean, what was that based on? And that's information that needs to be made public.
Sergeant Dorsey, the system is horribly, tragically broken in that case because Kenneth Walker, Breonna's boyfriend, is not the bad guy here. He thought somebody violent was breaking into their home. He says repeatedly they didn't identify themselves. He's legally allowed to have self-defense and to fire his gun. He owned it legally. So if he's justified in firing that shot, which he is legally, and the police are justified in firing back, the system's broken in that case.
Well, listen, I don't necessarily believe that the officers were justified in firing. They say that they announced and that they entered and he fired first. We know that they arrested him or at least transported him and held him for several days after the shooting. And so I think if what they're saying is true, Kenneth Walker would be facing attempted murder charges against a police officer, those who entered a residence serving a legitimate search warrant and making an announcement that they're the police coming in, and that didn't happen. And so everything that we've heard put forth by this police department has been intellectually dishonest from start to finish. An officer fires 16 rounds without reassessing a threat, just willy-nilly shooting, and none of the bullets hit Kenneth Walker, 6 hit Breonna Taylor. It's hard to believe. And I think that this was designed to do what it did. Prosecutors can indict a ham sandwich, and in this case, they chose not to indict, and that's why there was scant information or very limited information given to a grand jury.